All right, welcome everybody to this month's Portals community call, all about Power Pages architecture. As you can see, I'm Jason Gumbert from MS Dynamics World. Happy to be back here with Nicholas Hayduk, who will be taking us forward. Just a couple of notes as we get started. First, you can ask questions at any time. Nick does a great job of keeping an eye on that, and I will as well. Look for the questions block in the webcast interface and enter them at any time as anything comes up. Also, we are recording today's event. We'll be making that available on demand after the session ends, as we do for all of these sessions. So without any further delay, Nick, I'm going to hand things over to you.
Sounds good. Thank you very much. As you can see on the screen today, we are talking about Power Pages architecture. We also got some release notes that have come out since we last chatted. So let's get started. All right, quick intro for those of you who might be new. My name is Nicholas Hayduk, President and Software Engineer at Engineered Code Consulting Inc., based here in Regina, Saskatchewan, Canada. I'm a Microsoft MVP that I've been working with Power Pages for the last 15 years or so. My career began at ADX Studio, which was the company that originally built Power Pages and was acquired by Microsoft in 2015. At Engineered Code, we're a Microsoft partner that assists people with Power Pages implementations. We also have EC Learn, which is our learning management product that's built directly on the Power Platform. So that's what we do day to day. If you want to keep in touch with us, you can follow or you can connect with me on LinkedIn. We've also got our X or Twitter account. We've got our blog that I usually put out, at least once a month, a blog post. We've got our YouTube channel where, in addition to the recordings of this, we also have our weekly tips. We've also have the CRM.audio podcast, so the Refresh the Cache podcast, all about Power Pages that I do with George Dubinsky. We've got a couple of episodes coming out here pretty quickly here. We've recorded some and we are recording more as well. So keep an eye out on the CRM.audio feed for that, or you could again follow us on LinkedIn or Twitter, and we'll make sure to share that when those are out. But I expect those to be out very shortly. So lots of ways to keep connected with me and the company if you are interested in Power Pages stuff. As always, just want to say thanks to the team at MS Dynamics World. Jason and the rest of the team there have been superb to be working with over the last I guess we started this in 2020, so we're entering year number 6 here. So it's been a great journey, and certainly would not have been possible without their support. So thank him and the team at MS Dynamics World for being on this journey with us. So in terms of agenda, we've got some news. Like I said, we've got some release wave plans to go through, as well as another vulnerability. It seems like we were talking about quite a few of those recently with Power Pages. Then we'll talk about today's topic, which is Power Pages architecture. So we're going to talk about, how Power Pages is a web app that uses Dataverse as a database. We talk about solutions and Dataverse, all that sort of stuff. We'll talk about the date and time of our next community call, as well as there's the opportunity for questions. As Jason mentioned, if you have any questions throughout the presentation, please feel free to drop those in the question area. If you have questions that are kind of unrelated to today's topic, that's no problem. Just ask them. I'll most likely kind of deal with them at the end. But yeah, feel free to ask anything, kind of Power Pages, Power Platform, portals, that sort of stuff. Happy to answer any questions that you might have throughout the session. So let's talk about the news. So often I will start with the Power Pages product team blog, on which there was nothing new since we last got together in January. I think the last thing that they announced was the GA general availability of Power Pages in Norway, and there's been nothing since then. And I think the reason for that is because of our next slide, and that's because since we last met, kind of at the end of January, the Power Pages, or I guess the Power Platform 2025 Wave 1 release plan came out. So for those of you who might be new to the Microsoft ecosystem, the Microsoft kind of Power Platform business applications ecosystem, you may be wondering, what are these waves? So the way that Microsoft kind of groups all these their updates together is there's two waves. Wave one is from April to September of each year, and then wave two is for October all the way through March of each year. So when we talk about the 2025 wave one, we're talking about what should we expect to see in 2025 from April until September. Now, the plans for that, so that's what they've kind of announced, are usually announced a few months in advance. So generally, we see kind of near the end of January, we'll see the release wave plans for April through September. And then generally, I think it's about the July timeframe where we'll see the plans. So it's kind of a preview of what we might be able to expect. Now, nothing is written in stone, things change. Sometimes things get removed. More often, things actually get added to the list. So it's a living document. It's a living website. There are things that pop up in there all the time. But it kind of gives us an idea of what we might see over the next 6 to 8 months. The other thing I tell people, especially with Power Pages, is that's not all we're going to see. By keeping an eye on the Power Pages product team blog, they announce a lot more new things than what we just see in the release notes. So the release notes are a subset of what we would hope to see over the next 6 months. So what goodies can we expect here between April and September of 2025? Honestly, not the biggest list of features we've ever seen. Certainly not the least. There were years where sometimes there was nothing or maybe one thing kind of Power Apps portals related in the release waves. Now we've got these 4 things. It's again not the biggest list that we've ever seen, but this is what we've got. So the first one is add a section contextually with Copilot. You could always you've been able to add a section. So this is a section of a page. So if you're working on a particular web page in Power Pages in the Design Studio, you have historically been able to use the Copilot pane. So that's the little pane that shows up on the right-hand side of your screen when you click the little Copilot button. You've been able to use that to add a section to a page. What they're adding is when you actually go to add content through the Power Pages Design Studio, when you click the little kind of plus button and say, hey, I want to add some more content here, now the Copilot little section will pop up there. So in context of when you're trying to add a section, you can then describe to Copilot what you want. So you don't have to go to the Copilot specific pane, which is kind of a experience on the side. You can go, it'll kind of pop up in context. Basically, it's for people who may not realize what all the Copilot features are. They're trying to put the Copilot into the places where historically you would have gone to do things. Now when Copilot can help, they're trying to kind of insert the ability to add your prompts kind of where you would have gone historically to do it manually. So that's what adding a section contextually with Copilot means. The next one here is modern lists. So here, modern lists have been out for a while. I think technically they're still in preview. These features that they're mentioning are listed as will be generally available. So I think with this, the whole kind of modern list itself will be generally available. And what they've announced is that they're going to fill in some of the gaps. So modern lists, if you're not already familiar with, are a new rendering of the list component that exists within Power Pages. So that's exposing your views from Dataverse in kind of a table or a list on Power Pages. For years and years and years, we've had the same kind of classic experience. It has kind of paging and all these sorts of different features. A little while back, Microsoft announced the modern lists. So it's basically a reimagining of it. Some of the big features include there's no longer paging. It's just kind of an infinite scroll. So as you keep scrolling, it just keeps loading more records. So it's not page by page. Kind of a new interface. There's kind of column level filtering that you get right in the header of the list. There's what they call shimmer loading. So it kind of before the first page or the first set of data is actually loaded, you can kind of see you'll maybe see this on Facebook where it kind of like a ghost representation of what the data might look like versus just a regular kind of spinning wheel. So there's a few kind of new features that exist within modern lists, but they've been in preview. So there's been some gaps that will be filled in order for this feature to go to GA. And again, what it is it's filling in the gaps of features that were available within lists, but you could only get if you use classic lists, not the new modern lists. So the two big ones, would be JavaScript support. So with a classic list, there is a JavaScript event that fires for each page of data that comes in, and that allowed you to kind of, in a supported way, update your list as you went page by page, because each page of data was loaded asynchronously. And so if you wanted to modify the columns, add some custom JavaScript to change how things are looking a little bit, you needed that event to know, okay, they've clicked to the next page, I got to run my code again. That custom JavaScript event didn't exist within modern lists. So it really limited your ability to do any sort of kind of supported JavaScript on the list. So that's one of the gaps that will be filled. There will be an event that you can kind of tie into to be able to properly write some JavaScript to modify your modern lists. The other one is metadata filters. So if you've used lists before, you might be familiar with the metadata filters where you can add either above or to the beside your lists. You can add filtering kind of on various columns, and you can set up, you could even use kind of fetch XML to set up these kind of custom metadata filters. Again, that's something that even if you set that up on a modern list, it just didn't render. It just wasn't part of the code that controlled that. So that's going to be added as well. So basically all the features that we have come to know with the classic lists should be enabled for modern lists as well. So they're kind of filling all those gaps, and if you choose to use modern lists going forward, you should kind of have all that feature parity that you'd had with classic lists. Moving on, next one is file upload enhancements, and this one seems to be on the list almost every release waves. So what they've talked about here is support for larger file sizes, especially when it comes to SharePoint. They've talked about malware scanning for files that are being uploaded, drag and drop interface, as well as a wizard to help you set up the SharePoint integration right in the Design Studio. So if you're uploading files via Power Pages, which is a super common request or a requirement for those sites, those are you'll see some enhancements on those over the next few months as well. And then finally, Entra External ID. So think of it as the next generation of Azure AD B2C. So that has been historically Microsoft's preferred identity provider for Power Pages was Azure AD B2C. Microsoft has recently introduced Entra External ID as, it's not necessarily an exact replacement, but it's filling the same. It fills the same feature set. So even though it's not a direct like the next version, it's a new product that does the same thing. So what they're introducing is an actual wizard to help you set that up. That doesn't involve you having to go to a whole bunch of different admin portals. Kind of a single streamlined interface to set up Entra External ID with your Power Pages portal, including actually provisioning the Entra External ID tenant, setting it all up, and you can kind of do that in just a few quick steps. So that existed for B2C for a while, then it kind of disappeared. I'm not sure what happened to it, but it is coming back for Entra External ID. And we do suggest, for the most part, if you've got a new project that's starting up, rather than going with B2C, probably Entra External ID. That's where Microsoft will be making its investment going forward. So if you're not already familiar with Entra External ID, probably something to look at for sure, as opposed to B2C these days. All right, and that was what was kind of covered in the release wave plan. So let's talk about that vulnerability I talked about. And this is, I think, maybe the third call in a row where we've talked about a vulnerability. We had some vulnerabilities list in the web API. This is, I think, there's been a few times where Power Pages has made the news for data leaks or that sort of thing. And honestly, for the first couple times it happened, they weren't bugs in the code. They were just features that you could enable that were maybe a little too easy to enable to expose data, but the product acted exactly as it was documented. So you might have had people in there who didn't realize that, hey, checking this box would make it so that data was publicly available, but I mean, it was documented that way. These last couple are a bit more concerning. So last time I think we talked about there were some issues with the web API where even if you set up permissions to only expose certain columns, there was ways that an attacker could craft their own queries that allowed them to access data that you had not intended them to be able to access. Again, those have been patched. This one, not as many details into the specifics of what happened, um, but it is listed as this one does seem to be it was a pretty critical problem. So what the details that they provided say that it allowed attackers to gain elevated access by bypassing user registration control. So it sounds like there was some way that someone could kind of bypass user registration and actually get a real account in your Power Pages site in an unauthorized way. I don't know how they could do that, but that apparently is that those are the details we've been given. So this has been fixed. They have closed that gap, but there were exploits detected in the wild. So this wasn't just like in theory someone could do this. I'm assuming based on logs and stuff, they could tell whether attackers had actually been using this on your site. So if your site was impacted, so if they have the records to show that someone used this vulnerability to get into your site in an unauthorized way, I believe you should have received an email from Microsoft with the details. Thankfully, I haven't had any clients yet that have received that email, so I don't know what it looks like, but that's the indication I've received is that if you were impacted, if they have the records to show that someone did use that vulnerability against your site, Microsoft should have already been in touch with you. So, I mean, obviously, this isn't good. I don't know if this speaks more to the fact that this platform is becoming more popular and is therefore just a larger target for attackers, or if there's more security, if Microsoft needs to kind of step up the security and making sure that there's fewer of these things out there. It's kind of hard to comment on that, but I know that in addition to working with Power Pages, we do a lot of work with WordPress as well. WordPress is probably the most popular platform out there. It's also, because it's so popular, is a big target for attacks, right? That the attackers are going to be looking for platforms where they can find one vulnerability and use it on a bunch of people. So as something gets more popular, you're just going to end up having more of these things come out that there were gaps. So not great news. Hopefully no one here on this call got any emails to indicate there were any problems, but good to know that it's fixed, and hopefully next month we won't have another report of a vulnerability. Okay, so that's what I had in terms of news for this month. So let's talk about today's topic, which is Power Pages architecture. So again, what I want to talk about today is, the actual Power Pages product. What are the actual kind of components of it? How is it structured so that when something kind of this is something that if everything's working great, you probably don't have to think about this as much. But when you're getting an error, it's helpful to know, okay, to have the context of, oh, that error might be coming from Dataverse or the web app, or when something's down, it's just kind of helpful to understand the overall architecture. So that's why I thought it'd be nice to kind of summarize all the kind of different pieces that we're working with when it comes to Power Pages. So if you didn't already know, a Power Pages site is basically a web application. So it's an Azure web app. So it's a web application hosted in Azure that uses Dataverse as its database. So when I did my introduction, I mentioned that I worked at ADX Studio, which was the company that originally built this. So one thing I always find is helpful to keep in mind is this product, at least kind of its original form, was built by someone outside of Microsoft. The Power Pages product doesn't have any special access to Dataverse or the Microsoft ecosystem that anyone else couldn't do. So there's nothing kind of special that Microsoft is kind of leveraging that the outside world couldn't. So you think of it as kind of the standard web architecture is you have a web server, it hooks into a database, and so when ADX Studio built this product, they basically built the server-side code to run the website, and it connected to Dataverse as its database. So all the stuff I'm going to reference in here and the images, if you're interested, basically it comes from the documentation that I've linked to here. So there's kind of a section on architecture, as well as a white paper that Microsoft has released on Power Pages in terms of its architecture. So this is kind of those are the sources for all this. So this is at a very high level. Here's what we're looking at when you think of, hey, I have my Power Pages site. So we can see here from the web, you're using HTTPS to connect to your Power Pages site. Sitting in front of that, if you've enabled it, is essentially it's Azure Front Door, which can act as both a CDN, so a content delivery network, and a web application firewall or a WAF. So that's what sits in front of your Power Pages web applications, in addition to, as you can see, Azure Traffic Manager. So if you're not familiar with Azure Traffic Manager, we use it on most of our sites that are not kind of Power Pages related as well. It lets you kind of easily switch. It's somewhat kind of a load balancing technology. You can have basically set up multiple services and kind of direct the traffic between them. So you can see here that every Power Pages site actually has two web applications that that run it. Usually, within the various Azure regions, within the geography, you kind of have your primary application server, and then you have the backup. And if there's issues with the primary one, Azure Traffic Manager can sense that and then route the traffic to the second region. And so that's kind of one way that they help ensure that uptime is as high as it can be. So again, so we have the traffic coming to the web, goes through the CDN through Azure Front Door if you've got that enabled. And then we'll then go through Azure Traffic Manager and then go through the web application that's actually running the Power Pages code. Now, specifically, and we're going to talk about this here in a little bit, this is for the Power Pages website itself. This does not include the Pages Management app, the Power Pages Management app, or the Portal Management app, the Model-Driven Power app. This does not include the Design Studio. This is just whatever, your site.powerappsportals.com. This is the actual, this is the architecture for the actual site itself. And like I mentioned, it is using Dataverse as your database for the web application. So at a high level, this is what the architecture of Power Pages looks like. Now, how does it actually connect to Dataverse? Over the years, this has changed a little bit, but as of now, it uses a server-to-server connection. So this uses a Microsoft Entra application, so an app registration where you create a client ID, client secret, all that sort of stuff. Now, this is handled for you automatically. You don't have to set up the app registration. When you provision a portal, all of that is done for you automatically. In case you're wondering, because Power Pages generally comes pre-set up with Entra ID authentication, yes, it is using that same application for both. So it's using the application both as the server-to-server authentication into Dataverse, and it's using that same application or that same app registration for the Entra ID authentication. Now, in terms of the actual name of that application, like the app registration, it's changed throughout the years, and I'll show you kind of what my Azure tenant looks like. But if you look if you're in a tenant that has a lot of different portals over the years, you might see the MS CRM portals, you might see portals dash the ID, you might see Power Apps portals dash the name. I believe currently what they're doing is it's portals dash name. So let me just bring that up here, and I'll kind of show you what that looks like. So I'm in my kind of my test tenant here, and if I look at all the applications in my tenant, you can see over the years I've created a lot of portals, and you can see some of the various naming conventions. So MS CRM portals, you can see the portals / the name of the portal / the ID of the portal, all sorts of different naming conventions. But again, these are some of the more recent ones I've created. Portals / contact us request. That seems to be the current thing. But if you're ever interested in knowing, and you have to, for whatever reason, track down the actual application, the app registration for your portal, if you're in the Power Platform Admin Center, this is what application ID is. So this right here, that's going to be, so F150. If I find F150, where is it? Which one? PAP. F150. How would I just do this? F150. There it is. So you can see Power Apps Portals and HPAP. So this is the actual application being used by that site to connect to Power Pages. You can also see that if you go into the site details, you'll see the application ID here. So you can see it either in the Design Studio or in the Power Platform Admin Center. You kind of track down what the application ID is for that. Now, you are not generally supposed to touch that application. That's kind of Microsoft's to deal with. I have seen people change that application to support multi-tenant authentication, and I've heard that that's okay, but I don't know if that's officially okay or it's just probably going to work. But the other thing to know about that connection is, so previously the connection was established using the system user. So before these kind of app registrations techniques, they actually connected Power Pages connected to your Dataverse application by using the system user. Now it's via these application users. So the thing to know about this is, and this is a very common kind of misconception, is that when a user is on your Power Pages site, that user is a contact. So when they perform operations against your data, like perform operations that impact Dataverse, the connection to Dataverse is using that application user. So the created on, or sorry, the created by or the modified by will show up as that portal app registration. It won't show up as the person who's on the site, because the person who's on the site is a contact, and the created by, modified by has to be a user. And so the user is based on its connection to Dataverse, and that's based on that app registration. So there's other ways of trying to kind of figure out what contact is making those changes, but out of the box, the created by, modified by, that's always going to be the app registration user that's created as part of that server to server connection. It's going to be unrelated to the person who's actually logged into the portal as a contact. So just be aware that that app registration exists. That's created. It's one of the reasons where if you're trying to create a portal and you don't have enough permissions to create app, to create app registrations in your Azure tenant, you're going to run into errors because that's part of the process of installing Power Pages. All right. So let's talk about the actual web app itself. So, and a common point of confusion is like, well, why do I have to convert? Why is it telling me it's a trial, and why do I have to convert it to a production instance? I'm in a sandbox. So the thing if there's one thing you take away from this is to understand that the Power Pages site, its kind of state, whether as production or trial, is completely unrelated to what type of Dataverse environment you have. So all of your Power Pages sites, when you install them, they start off as trials. Now that trial will either last, if you're doing a trial in a trial environment, so in a trial Dataverse environment, the trial will basically be aligned, so when the other trial ends, so will your Power Pages site end. If you are installing it in a non-time limited, so a sandbox or a production environment, I believe it will give you 90 days for your trial, after which you have to convert your Power Pages site to a production instance. Now, again, that has nothing to do with whether your Dataverse environment is production or sandbox. Even in a sandbox environment, you need to convert your Power Pages site to a production instance so that it doesn't disappear after 90 days. So it is normal, typical to have production sites in sandbox environments. And the key here is that production sites consume licenses. So you do need to pay for Power Pages sites that are in sandbox and in any sort of pre-production environment. You don't pay for them while they're trials, but as soon as that trial expires and you want to convert them to production, and there are certain limitations of trials, there's certain things you can't set up when you have a trial. Yeah, so you need to convert those to production, and you do that even in kind of your downstream environments like dev or test or UAT, that sort of thing. So understanding that all of them start as trials, and then at some point you could convert them to production so that they don't get lost. And so Microsoft has this kind of handy graphic about what happens if you don't convert to production? So, like I said, you create a new trial. Look, it's good for 30 days. If you can convert to production, great. It's there. It's kind of permanent. It consumes licenses, but it's no longer a trial. If you don't convert it to production, what happens is it will go into a suspended status for 7 days, after which it will be deleted. So let's talk about what do we mean by deleted. So when we talk about deleting a Power Pages site, the only thing that actually gets deleted is the Azure web app. So I'm just going to quickly go back to this thing. So what gets deleted is in here, what gets deleted is everything but whatever's in Dataverse itself. So your settings for your CDN, your WAF go away, your traffic manager, so all the Azure resources, but Microsoft Dataverse itself is not impacted. So after it's deleted, so whether you delete it manually, because that's an operation you can perform in the Power Platform Admin Center or in make.powerpages.microsoft.com, you can say delete a site. I want to be clear that that will never touch any data that's in Dataverse. What it does is it's deleting the resources in Azure. So for the most part, you don't really lose a whole lot of work. You might lose things that aren't when you change them, and mostly this is changes that you'll do via the Power Platform Admin Center. Things like custom domains, enabling CDN, enabling WAF, enabling SharePoint or Power BI. Those are the types of things that that configuration isn't stored in Power Pages, and those are tied. Some of those things are tied to the actual app registration that we talked about earlier. So you can reactivate a site, and for the most part, it's going to bring back all of your work. All the stuff that's stored in Dataverse just kind of magically reappears. There's just certain things you'll have to reset up because that sets up new resources in Azure. That you're going to get a new app registration, and so you'll have to set up things like SharePoint or Power BI embedded or some of those things. But so when you delete a website, it doesn't touch the solutions that exist in your Dataverse environment, and it doesn't touch the data that exists within those solutions. So your web pages and your forms and your lists, all that sort of stuff. None of that is touched when you delete a website. Okay. I've got some questions here that I'll get to. So Adrian says, what permissions are required to create a site? I have system admin in one of my customer Dataverse environments, but they have managed to block the creations of sites somehow. So the big one is so system admin is it may not be enough. So if you are a Power Platform admin or a Dynamics 365 admin, that usually helps. But the other one that I mentioned earlier was the ability to create that app registration in Azure. So if your user account doesn't have the ability to create app registrations in Azure, the provisioning won't work as well. So system admin is usually not enough. You usually want to be a global, or sorry, not a global admin, of course, would do it, but a Power Platform or a Dynamics 365 admin. And then also you got to check on the Azure side the ability to create app registrations within Azure. Any idea if Microsoft is going to provide a way to audit Power Pages contacts, external logged in users in the future? I'm guessing, Alfred, you're wondering about like in terms of like showing which records they've changed and that sort of thing. As far as I know, there's no effort underway to kind of make contacts have similar functionality to users. There are already methods that we can use where you can create custom kind of lookups on records that relate to contacts, and there's already kind of features built in Power Pages that allow you to kind of say, okay, this was the contact that edited this record, or this was the contact that created this record. But I'm not aware of any efforts that are underway to make that similar to how it just kind of worked out of the box with users. I believe this is something that I believe was raised recently, and so I'm not aware of anything to expect anything coming that would kind of fill the gap and make it seem similar to how it works with users. Let's see here, and the last one. So as all the actions are done via the app user, the API limits are one time the usual limits of Dataverse. If so, is there a way of extending this when creating a heavy load portal with multiple hundreds or thousands of users? So the licenses that you get, in terms of like API entitlements, when you buy Power Pages user or when you buy Power Pages licenses, that comes with extra API entitlements. Now, in terms of the API limits, if you're running into the actual limits of that, I'm not aware of there being any way of, we see this when you do like a bulk import and you reach the limits of one particular app user. So what you do is you create 5 app users and you kind of round robin between them. I'm not aware of anything like that for Power Pages. So if you are, like, we've dealt with Power Pages sites that have tens of thousands. I'm trying to think of maybe even hundreds of thousands, and we haven't reached any limits that way. The caching certainly helps eliminate some of that, but I'm not aware that the product itself has anything baked in that would allow you to kind of have multiple users distribute that load between them in order to to get around the kind of API limits in terms of like how many requests per individual user. I believe everything just comes from that one user account, and you'd have to make sure that you're following those limits. Let's see here. Any other questions that I've got? Okay, talked about that one. Okay, last question here before I move on. Do any of the authentication providers provide out-of-the-box mechanisms for the customers IA's account to manage their own users, the contacts registered under their account? So the authentication providers themselves are essentially kind of unrelated to people's ability to manage their own contacts. So if you use the old partner portal template, there's actually functionality in there to allow users to invite their own contacts. But so user registration and user authentication are, obviously related, but mostly separate concepts. So because most of the time what you're doing is you invite the contact to the portal. When they come to log in, they set up their account and they do that. So allowing people to manage their own contacts to get them invited to the portal, you could do with any auth provider. It's not really limited by that. It's more using the invitation code mechanisms that exist within Power Pages to allow people to create the contacts, allow them to initiate the invitation code. Then the user gets an email. They'd be able to then log in, set up their account. So kind of not the authentication providers aren't a limiting factor there. You can do that with invitation code. So that's kind of unrelated to whether they could manage their own users. So short answer is yes, people can do that, and it has nothing really to do with the authentication providers themselves. Okay, now let's get back to let's talk about the actual upgrades to the web app itself. So like I mentioned, Power Pages is a web application that's running in Azure, and so that's basically a bunch of code. For those of you who have been around since the ADX Studio days, there was the master portal web application that you would host somewhere. That's what Microsoft is doing. They have this master portal code that gets deployed to your web app. You're not sharing that web app with anyone else. Every Power Pages site has their own completely separate, so it's not like a multi-tenant. You're not sharing that with anyone. Everyone gets their own. Now, but that code gets updated every once in a while, and so it's typically on roughly a monthly cadence. Microsoft will produce release notes for the web application code itself, and what happens is Microsoft, kind of on a monthly basis, will go and deploy the latest kind of bundle of code to all of the servers. Now, there have been some updates to this, and I think I talked about this a little bit back in January. And so the update to this was, historically, there were kind of two different waves of releases. you could check a box that says, I want my site to be enabled for early upgrades. And again, right now we're talking about only the code on the Azure Web App Server, the code that you have no control over. You can't change it. It's Microsoft's bundle of code that they put on the servers and they manage it themselves. The only control you had was if you checked the box, you could basically be at the front of the list every month to get the new code from Microsoft. And if you didn't check the box, then you'd be later on in the month. What they've introduced recently is a middle tier. So if you check the early upgrade, and I'm going to it's roughly kind of weeks. So if you check the early upgrade, you're going to be in the first week. If you don't check the early upgrade, now Microsoft splits them into two separate groups. It used to be either early upgrade or not early upgrade. Now they've got three groups. There's early upgrade, and then not early upgrade, but not production environments. And then you've got production environments. Now we're talking about Dataverse environments. We're not talking about a production website. We're talking about, is the environment that the website lives in a production Dataverse environment, or is it a sandbox environment? So you get all the things that are early upgrade, then you get all of the websites that are not early upgrade but in sandbox environments, and then you finally get all of the websites that are not early upgrade and in production environments. And that just ensures that you always will get the updates in a non-production environment before you get it into a production environment. So it's that middle step here that's new. And I think that's a nice change. And so you can kind of expect that over the course of a month, you'll see, the first week, all the early upgrades will get it. Then after that, there'll be all the not early upgrade, but sandbox, and then all the production ones. All right. I got a question here. Can you clarify for a newbie the terminology for sites versus having multiple subsites, apps, thingies within a particular Power Pages set up at a particular URL? Yeah. So when I talk about a Power Pages site, we are talking about a single site at a single kind of unique something.powerappsportals.com. So in a single Dataverse environment, you can have multiple sites. And so, for example, let me bring that up here. So if I just go to make.powerpages.microsoft.com, so this is within, and here I've got two environments. So within my Nicholas Hayduke environment, we'll see here that I actually have multiple sites. And if I were to look in my management app here, there'd be multiple websites, and each one of these would be a separate site. Now, within those sites, there could be lots of pages, lots of different sections, but these are all considered like this is one site, this is one site, this is one site. So in here, we have active sites. Now, these are all within the same environment, but these are all separate sites. And so they'd all have their own unique something.powerappsportals.com URL. So that's what we mean when we talk about a site. All the functionality that's on this domain would be served by a completely separate Azure web app. So in this case, I've got two active sites, and this means that there are two Azure web apps running, one running for this one, and as we saw, there's actually four because each one of these has kind of an active and then there's a passive one. But this one has one set, this one has a completely different set, both talking to the same Dataverse instance, but their own complete different WAF, CDN, all that sort of stuff. And then we have the inactive ones. So these are all the old ones that I haven't touched in a while. And because Microsoft doesn't want to pay, because even the Power Pages team basically has to pay the Azure team for those things, these are the ones that they've basically deleted the Azure resources associated with them. So the web apps are gone. The data still exists in Dataverse. So if I were to reactivate, what it's going to do is re-provision those Azure resources. But again, each one of these is its own separate site. So hopefully, Darren, that answers your question. Okay, so we talked about web app upgrades. Let's talk about everyone's favorite subject. And we've talked about this a few times, so I'm not going to get too deep into it, but I thought it was appropriate to talk about caching. So often the bane of everyone's existence is caching within Power Pages. And so for performance reasons, when we query from the Azure web app to Dataverse, so I'm going to go all the way back to this picture. These arrows right here, This is the caching that everyone's always worried about. When a query is made from here to Dataverse, so from your web app to Dataverse, that is the caching that, the name of the podcast is Refresh the Cache. You'll often be told to refresh the cache. That's the cache we're talking about. We're not generally talking about the cache between the user's browser and the web server. We're talking about the cache from the web application to Dataverse. And the reason that cache exists is that if the web app had to go back to Dataverse on every single page load, it would be horrendously slow. If you've ever killed the cache or restarted the server and it takes a couple minutes to load, that's because none of those requests are cached. So it's these arrows right here, these big fat blue arrows. That's where the cache is that kind of everyone is usually thinking about. So that cache is automatically cleared for a specific table when any record or related table is created, updated, or deleted via the Power Pages site. So if you're on the site itself and you insert a record, edit a record, Power Pages will automatically just clear the cache. And so you don't really have to worry about cache in those cases. The cache is also cleared automatically every 15 minutes. So even no matter what, data on your Power Pages site should never be more than 15 minutes old. You can also clear the cache manually by either hitting the preview button in the Design Studio or by clicking there's a button on the _services/about page. So that's how the cache is. Those are the options for clearing the cache. So there's no supported way to clear the cache immediately when changes are made to Dataverse without going through Power Pages. So I'm going to again go back to this diagram. Where all the problems happen is when a change is made directly to Dataverse without it going through these application servers. So how does that happen? If you make a change through the Design Studio, and we're going to talk about this in a second, the Design Studio is not going through these web applications. If you make a change through the XRM toolbox, if you make a change through the Pages, Power Pages, or the Portals Management app, the Power App, those are not going through the Power Pages web server. All those changes go into Dataverse, and the Power Pages web server doesn't know about those. And so that's where you can end up with data that can be up to 15 minutes old because unless the cache is cleared, it doesn't know about those changes. So Aaron asks, have you got a preferred way of tricking the cache that isn't too hacky? Let's see here. No. So for the most part, if you're trying to get into hacks for getting around the cache, you're probably going to end up pretty miserable. The two major ones that I'm aware of are if you're, say, writing a liquid query, again, it's the actual queries themselves that get cached. So if you create a query that changes frequently, so for example, your query could be get me all records that were created before now, which would be every record, but because now is constantly changing every time you run now is changing, that's not going to get cached because now is constantly changing. So if you're doing a liquid query and you can figure out a way to put something in there that's dynamic, that changes each time, then that particular query is going to get cached. The only other way, like if you're using the web API, you can, because the web API is going through the Power Pages web server, if you perform an update via that way, that kind of clears the cache for that table as well. But I find for the most part, if you can kind of architect your solution appropriately, if your architecture relies on some sort of hacky way to get the cache cleared, eventually you're just going to be so frustrated and people are like, it's not going to be perfect. And so we find that like messaging saying like, hey, your request has been received and the website will be updated in less than 15 minutes, something like that. Just setting the expectation for users so you don't get a bunch of calls saying, why is this data like this? Or again, just kind of understanding how the cache works and architecting in a way so that users don't see something that they think is out of date is kind of the best way. So yeah, if there was a way to trick it that wasn't too hacky, everyone would know about it. And so those are the two that I know of, again, using the web API. But I strongly encourage you to think of, how can we just kind of get the users to understand kind of, hey, wait 10 minutes, wait 15 minutes. And for those of you who might be new to this, where you see this is when you're doing things like asynchronous workflows, plugins, Power Automate flows, when you have something that's going on in the background. So if you say, use Power Pages to create a record, but then you have a Power Automate flow that runs in the background to set some data on it, that Power Automate flow runs in the background. Power Pages doesn't know about it. So any changes that Power Pages may make won't show up on your site for a while, because for up to 15 minutes, because Power Pages has no idea that Power Automate has gone in and changed your record. And again, changes made to Dataverse via model-driven apps, the XFront toolbox, any sort of integrations you might have running, Azure Functions, all that sort of stuff. If the change is made to Dataverse without it going through the Power Pages web app, you're going to deal with this caching thing. All right, what do we got next? Okay, so I've kind of talked about this a couple times already. So the Power Pages Design Studio. So just to kind of clarify, that's this interface. So if I go into here and I click this edit button, this is so what we're seeing at make.powerpages.microsoft.com. This is a separate web application. This is not running on your whatever.powerappsportals.com site. This is a separate, completely separate web server. So why do I bring that up? Because it basically has its own completely separate caching. And what I find causes confusion is the difference between the sync button and the preview button. So again, if I go back here, I say edit site, people often wonder, what is this sync button? So this sync button is the cache killing button for the Design Studio. So if I were to go into into here and make a change directly to Dataverse, this thing has caching and doesn't know about it. If I then click sync, the cache for this site will be refreshed. And again, when I say this site, I mean the Design Studio, not the actual Power Pages site. If I click preview and click desktop, that will clear the site of the Power Pages site. So that's why those two buttons are different. Sync clears the cache of the Design Studio. Preview clears the cache of the Power Pages site itself. All right. Just checking. I don't think I've missed any questions. Okay. So the last topic we have here is solutions. Did I skip the? Yes, sorry. Because we're talking about something that's in Dataverse, all of the tables necessary for Power Pages, like web pages, website, web files, web templates, all these things are added to your environment via solutions. Now, if you have an environment that's been created recently, let's say in the last 6 months, maybe a year, some of the Power Pages solutions are pre-installed in your Dataverse environment. So that means when you go to install, and one of the reasons they've done that is when you go to install Power Pages, it just makes it go that much faster because it doesn't have to install those solutions. But either way, there's kind of pre-installing that. If you're installing Power Pages in an environment that's a little bit older, when you click the install button, it just might take a little bit longer to actually kind of do those installs for the first time. There's also solutions that are specific to each one of the different templates. So whether you're starting the blank portal or the FAQ portal, whatever, when you install each of the templates, they also usually have one or more of their own solutions that get installed. But if you keep installing the same kind of portal over and over again, you won't. Each subsequent install won't add any solutions. They're just adding data. Now, in terms of actually getting those solutions updated, Microsoft will never automatically update those solutions. The only thing that Microsoft automatically updates is the website code, the web application code. The solutions within your data environment, within your Dataverse environment, are not automatically updated, but you control those updates via the Power Platform Admin Center. So if I go back to here, you'll have an option in here where you can go to, I don't know if actually, so what we do is go into here, Power Pages site. And there's actually kind of two places you can do it, but in this case, I'm going to look here. I'm going to say check portal packages for upgrade. And so what this is going to do is it's looking at all the different solutions that are installed in my environment, and it's saying, oh, look, you actually have some solutions. So when they talk about portal packages, we're talking about Dataverse solutions. So the other way to get to this that I'm just going to skip to is if I go into environments, and I go into my environment here, And then I'll be able to go into resources and go to Power Pages sites. This is another way to look at it. Now, of course, because solutions are per environment, if you upgrade the solutions for, say, this one, it's going to upgrade it for all of them because they're all within the same environment. But I can click on here, see web package details, and here are all the different solutions I have that are installed related to Power Pages, and I can upgrade them here if I want. If I click the update button, it's literally behind the scenes installing upgraded solutions for all of these different things. As you can see, I haven't upgraded these in a while. This is not something that you have to do a whole lot of. There's not usually a lot of updates to the solutions, or if they are, they're usually not critical. And so often these will get pretty out of date. I know I was just dealing with a recent issue where we were trying to upgrade to the enhanced data model, so we had to contact support to help us get some old solutions updated. But for the most part, I would, maybe once a year take a look at these, get them updated so that you are current. But most of the new features that come with Power Pages are unrelated to these solutions. So when Microsoft talks about releasing new features like the ones we talked about in the release wave, rarely are they attached to these solutions. They're primarily attached to the monthly upgrades that happen to your website code. I think we talked about that. So, and as I mentioned earlier, deleting a site does not delete those solutions. If you want to delete the solutions, you basically have to delete them manually like you would any other solution. There's no set kind of manual for deleting the solutions. You can't click a button and have a Power Pages site completely removed from your environment. When you delete a site, all it does is delete the web app and the other Azure resources. The solutions and the data remain in your Dataverse environment. All right. So question here. So the clearing the cache at /_services/about returns a blank page with portal version. So in order to get the button to clear the cache, you need to be logged in as an administrator. So you'll see a blank page if you're not logged in as an administrator, but if you're logged in as an administrator to the portal, that's where you'll get the clear cache buttons. And then I got a question. What has been your experience when converting the old D365 portals pages to Power Pages? What will be lost, changed, added conflicts or issues? What is the best strategy to do this? Well, Gary, I got some good news for you. There is no conversion from D364 portal pages to Power Pages. They are the same product, just a new name. So as long as you are on any of the Microsoft versions, Dynamics 365 portals, Power Apps portals, Power Pages, they're all the same product. Now, there is an upgrade. There's actually kind of two upgrades that are kind of relatively recent, and those are the upgrade from Bootstrap version 3 to version 5. There's a process to upgrade that. And there's something new called the enhanced data model. So if you're on the standard data model, at some point you're probably going to want to look at upgrading to the enhanced data model. But in terms of the actual products themselves, anyone that was on Power Apps portals or so kind of the official names for the product were there was ADX Studio portals, then Microsoft bought them, then they were called either Dynamics 365 portals or the portal capabilities for Dynamics 365. Then they got renamed to Power Apps portals. Then it got renamed to Power Pages. Any of those post-acquisition things are all considered Power Pages. There's no upgrade between them. They're just naming changes, marketing, all that sort of stuff. So there's no need to upgrade from the old ones. Now, if you're talking about the ADX Studio ones, then that's a whole different thing. That their lots will get lost because what we had in ADX Studio was the ability to write our own custom server-side code, which we don't have that anymore. So there's really no good strategy. Most of the time, I would say you're just looking at re-implementing. There's very few cases where I've seen you can take an old ADX Studio site and upgrade it to Power Pages with any sort of reliability. The tools that Microsoft gave were only for really kind of basic sites that weren't using custom code, and the vast majority of the people were using custom code. So any of the Microsoft versions, you don't have to upgrade. If you're talking about ADX Studio, there's a very good chance that re-implementation is the best answer. Okay, let's see how much time we got here. Okay, 2:59 for me. So we got one more minute here. I think I've got one more question here. I think I've answered everything other than Darren says, can you give a high-level list of best practices, gotchas, or other things to consider when deciding on whether to create a new environment for each Power Pages site versus packing sites into a shared environment? Um, yeah, I mean, we are typically putting Power Pages into the environments where, like, they're usually interacting with data that already exists in those environments. So we typically aren't spinning up new environments just to kind of host a Power Pages site into. So it's really about, are those things sharing data with other applications? If they're not, it can be a little bit cleaner to maybe keep them separate. But then you also have the licensing costs of multiple environments. If you're going to have a dev, test, QA, if you have 3 or 4 environments per thing, then you're every new Power Pages site. So for the most part, we've had no issues having many sites within the same environment. So we kind of lean towards multiple sites in the same environment. So that's kind of my best advice there. Okay, I'm just going to quickly get through the last housekeeping items here. Our next call will be March 13th, so just a few weeks, or I guess 2 weeks from now. Again, thank you to Jason and the team at MS Dynamics World. Let me see if there's any other questions. Let's see here. Is there a way to remove duplicate ADX Studio entities from, so you purely just have the Power Pages related ones? So the way to remove the ADX Studio ones is to uninstall the solutions. And you just kind of do that manually, and you kind of start at the top and work your way down. There's no other magic bullet there. That's about it. Let's see, not related to today's presentation, but is related to exposing an editable Power App subgrid of Dataverse entity form in a basic form of Power Pages. Out of the box grids versus Fetch XML and building custom. So if you're looking for editable grids, Microsoft, their web API sample does include some editable grid examples. But I find for the most part, people are probably doing their own implementations of using the web API, building a PCF control to do that. And yeah, so I think that's it. Jason, anything to say before we wrap up?
No, just thanks to everyone in the audience for all the great questions, and thanks to you, Nick.
All right.
Should we leave it there?
Sounds good. Thanks all. See you next month.
Bye, everyone. We'll be following up with recording info.